Hey guys, it's Mr. Moonlight. I'm gonna be doing something quite interesting in Voxlblade today. I'm gonna solo the hardest dungeon in the game, which is the Corrupted Frog Dungeon on 2x difficulty while using the daily challenge modifier. The daily challenge today is Tenacious, Tanky, and Regenerating, which really isn't too hard. There have been way worse ones in the past. So apart from ego, there's not really any reason to be doing this dungeon solo, because you get the same rewards as doing it with a bunch of other people, and the difficulty does not increase. It's almost always better to have a bunch of people with you when doing this, but it's nice to know how to solo it just in case you don't have anyone to rely on. Now, soloing this is incredibly difficult, and it's even impossible in some builds. I do believe this is going to be the first video uploaded to YouTube where someone's actually soloed 2x Corrupted with daily challenge. So yeah, mess around with 2x Corrupted first, and then try do the daily challenges later. So your build matters so much when doing this. I'm gonna say that 80% of this is actually making a good build, and the other 20% is just fighting the enemies. I'm gonna be making a video on this build, but it's pretty basic tank build. You run Retaliate and Reinforce, and you're basically taking no damage with the loadout that I have. And Retaliate will let you clear massive waves of enemies at once. So unless you have any speed boost, or unless you're running Kitsune, the bullfrogs in this dungeon are going to be faster than you, so you need to be running in a circle so that they can never actually catch up to you. This was something that was prominent in a lot of older Roblox RPGs. I don't know if you guys played Swordburst. Especially in Swordburst 1, this strategy was really egregious. You just run around in a circle, and you wait until all the enemies clumped up so that you could hit them all with your attack, because the way that the AI works in Roblox, if the game is using the default AI, the enemies will run towards you in such a way that it's the least possible distance to get to you. And if you run in a circle, what will happen is they'll all just clump up. You can take advantage of this with Retaliate, because Retaliate basically makes it so that you counter the enemy's attacks and deal massive damage to them if lots of people attack you at once. But you still take damage while in Retaliate, which is why I advise you guys to use a lifesteal enchant. And the enemies can still seriously hurt you, so I suggest only using Retaliate on tankier builds which are slower. And by slower, I don't literally mean slower. So when I talk about slow and fast in a game like Voxlblade, I'm referring to a concept which is typically used in turn-based games, but it can also apply to RPGs as well. So what it actually means is that when a build is slow, or when your strategy is to play slow, you try to take control of the enemies in front of you, and you're able to appropriately respond and deal with any attacks that they may have. This dungeon ends when you die, and the enemies are obviously trying to kill you. So by playing it slow, you say, okay, let me see how these enemies are going to try and kill me on each wave. And let me make sure that I have something in my build or in my kit that can deal with all of the stuff that's in front of me. So typically in RPG games, what a slow build would look like is any sort of like Juggernaut or tank build, which is what I'm going for right now. Any sort of engine build which gets other things to do the work for you. For example, in this game, that would be summoners. And also most builds that rely on healing are slow. Now there's a grey line here, as with all things. Like a debuff build, I don't know if you'd call that slow. It's slow in the sense that you're trying to do what you can to prevent the enemy from gaining an advantage, and you're also applying some sort of control over the enemies. But some debuff builds in this game only apply debuffs to use Jinx to deal DPS, and that is what we would call a fast build. A fast build or a fast strategy is basically saying, I don't care what my enemy is going to do, I'm just going to focus on my objective and do it faster than you. So in this dungeon, a fast build would be trying to eliminate all the enemies before they can actually take any damage or even get close to dying. These are what 90% of the meta builds are right now. The ones that are hyper focused on DPS and burst damage. So the revved bleeding gun builds is obviously a fast build. The Hex Tentacle build that's making the rounds right now is fast as well. The Berserking Armor DPS builds are also fast. Generally just any build that you can think of that gets insane DPS, because mainly they're used to just kill the enemy as fast as possible, without even giving any consideration as to what their enemy is. So now that I've defined these terms, let me explain how it applies in a game like Voxlblade. For the Frog Dungeon, if you want to beat the highest difficulties on your own, your build either has to be really slow, like my build, or it has to be extremely fast. So let's break that down and I'll show you why that's the case. So in this dungeon, a ton of enemies spawn. As you can see, I'm surrounded by like 50 bullfrogs. And if you're a fast build, you're typically really easy to kill because you focused almost all your stats into damage. So as a result, you really want to kill your enemies before they can even hit you. Otherwise, you're just gonna die. Now, what normally ends up happening is that most DPS builds are fast enough to clear the earlier stages of this dungeon. The bullfrogs and the toadzerkers don't have much health, so it's really easy for them to kill them in a few hits without even getting hit back once. Now this is a fine strategy, and it works until your build isn't fast enough. What I mean by that is it simply doesn't do enough damage to kill all the enemies, and you finally end up getting hit and you get chain stunned and die. This is the problem that most builds run into when they start to face the dragonators. If we skip to wave 10, which is where they spawn, I'll show you what I mean. So wave 10 is starting, and there are 4 enemies in this round. And from both sides, a dragonator will spawn, and they'll start shooting fire beams at you. Now it's not too hard to dodge, but since there are 4 of them that are coming, it becomes really easy to slip up and not dodge a beam and die. Now a problem that most builds run into here is that they try and kill one dragonator, but it's too tanky to kill before the other ones spawn. And now you're trying to face 4 dragonators which are all shooting beams at you. And don't be fooled, while I'm taking no damage, most builds will just die instantly. So if they don't have enough DPS and try and continue their fast strategy, which is to kill the enemies before they can get hit, it's just not going to work unless you have a really fast build which can do so much damage that you can kill the dragonators before the other ones spawn. And while it might work on wave 10, it's probably not going to work on wave 16 where 4 dragons spawn and a bunch of dragonauts. And 99% of the time, it's not going to work on wave 17, where 7 dragonators spawn. I don't know any build that's fast enough to beat that wave, but I'm sure it exists, and someone's just gatekeeping it. Which is why I say that you can theoretically beat this dungeon if you're really fast. Now, you're way more likely to beat this dungeon with a slow build. And the reason for why that's the case is right in front of your eyes. Unlike a fast build, I acknowledge that the dragonator has a fire beam, and my build has things in it to deal with that. I have so much physical defense and flat protections that I'm able to straight up block every single attack that the dragonators have. And now that I've countered their abilities and their plan, I can focus on doing damage, which through retaliate doubles up as a counter as well. So I'm acknowledging the challenges that I face when dealing with these enemies, dealing with them, and then enacting my own plan. That is what you call a slow strategy. Now there are other slow strategies which are even simpler to use. One of them is to neutralize your enemy so they can't hit you, and then you're able to deal damage. And one build which does this really well is the Kakai King Sandstorm build, which permanently stuns your enemies and basically makes it so that they can never hit you. Now, just as this Knight build, that's one of the only builds in the game that can do this dungeon 2 times corrupted solo. So yeah, I feel like I'm definitely onto something here. If you want to solo this dungeon, you gotta develop a build that's slow enough to deal with the challenges that the dragonators pose, because they'll be your biggest problem 99% of the time. The boss is really not the hardest part about this dungeon. It's either wave 16 or 17 depending on your build. Speaking of those 2 waves, let me show you the unique challenges that they pose, and how I'm going to deal with them. So on wave 16, a bunch of dragonators spawn, but dragonauts also spawn. Now, dragonauts in this dungeon pose a unique challenge to me, because they have the ability to guard break you really easily with a really big hitbox. And why is that a problem? Because the way that I deal with the dragonators is I block their attacks. And by the dragonauts guard breaking me, they're effectively taking away one of my ways to deal with the dragonators. And if I don't deal with the challenge of the dragonauts now, I'll die to the dragonators. So what do? I make sure that every enemy is lined up on this fence. And I know that if I jump down right now and retaliate, all these enemies are going to hit me at once, which allows me to get the dragonauts pretty low right off the bat. Now you're going to see me move really differently compared to how I fought in wave 10. As you can see, I'm using the rock behind here as like a stopgap. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm still dealing with the dragonators. I'm trying to block their moves when I have to. But by running away from the dragonauts, who are marginally slower than me, I'm able to avoid their guard break and block the dragonator attacks. And now my retaliate's off cooldown, I get up and close to retaliate. Once that's done, I have no business being near the dragonauts again, so I'm going to keep on running, keep on blocking attacks when I have to. And in this way, I'm able to deal with all the challenges that the enemies pose. And I'm able to deal damage to them, while they're not able to deal damage to me, with the exception of the rare fire beam. So from here on out, it's smooth sailing. The dragonators are tankier than the dragonauts, so you'll be able to kill the dragonauts faster, and return back to the original strategy, which was just to block. Now the next wave is wave 17, which a lot of people think is the hardest wave. And I really don't blame them, I think that's true. Unless you have a really suitable build, it's just not possible. But fortunately, my build was literally revolved around beating this dungeon, so it's no harder than wave 10 for me. In this wave, no enemies will spawn other than dragonators, but the catch is there's 7 of them. Now I don't know about you, but I don't know any build that has enough DPS to just melt through all the health like that. So you need some kind of a unique way to deal with them. You're not going to be able to just dodge like 7 attacks at once. Running around is not going to help you. For me, that's blocking. They can't guard break, so if I block every single attack and time my attacks perfectly, I'll have a window where I shouldn't get hit. Now it's interesting because they all have different attack timings because they will spawn at different times. So the challenge here becomes timing your attacks, especially retaliate, so that you can counter as many of their hits as possible because you don't want to take damage. So when I see a bunch of them winding up at once, I go in, pop retaliate, and it pops them for a good amount of their health. Now I got my timing a bit wrong, I could have countered more stuff, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I stay alive so that I can use my retaliate again. And I really don't have to do anything, just block, hold block, and when retaliate's off cooldown, and not only that, when it's an open opportunity for me to counter as many things as possible, then I use it again. So if you get hit by the fire beam when you're using retaliate, it will still burn you, so I kind of want to avoid that. So I walk towards them so that they're forced to use their tail swipe, and I counter all of them. And at this point, they're already below half HP, so I get confident and start going in for some basic attacks. This is fine so long as you're also blocking. But I have so much confidence now from doing this so many times that I'm able to just see it through to its end and beat this wave without any trouble. So if you guys want me to post the full VOD footage of this dungeon run, then I'll do it. I just didn't think people would watch through to the end. But the end is the best part, because it's where I showcase all my amazing loot. Before we get to that though, we have to beat the boss, which is wave 20. So the boss fight is the most annoying thing about this. My strategy to deal with him is I'm able to block every single one of his attacks without taking any damage, with the exception of his guard break. So I'm going to be blocking everything and either dodging or countering the guard break. And after doing that, I will just be hitting him with my M1s to slowly chip away at his HP. Now if you look at my DPS counter in the bottom left, I actually reached an average of like 30 to 45, which for a tank build is actually pretty good. The problem is that when you're soloing this boss and its tanky modifier, it's almost nothing. So I kid you not when I say that I spent 30 minutes doing this. This was just the most mind-numbing experience. It's not meant to be done solo, and it's definitely not meant to be done solo on a tank build. In a funny way, the biggest challenge that this boss poses is boring me out of my existence and hoping that I quit the game. But after already getting so far, I'll never dream of doing such a thing. I killed this boss and got his rewards. Let's see what he gives. I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot of loot, but I was very disappointed. So I actually got no brilliant gems, which is an insanely unlucky run. And I know someone who got 4 in one run, but I guess that's just the game saying you shouldn't have done this solo.